Hey everyone, Eric on Paper here, and I'm Eric, and today I'm going to show you how to ink this Batman drawing using predominantly a quill. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to get a video of me actually illustrating it, mainly because I was getting an infusion at the time, but you always have to keep working. So the main thing to remember in using a quill is why you're using it in the first place. Now, I like to use a quill when I want a really etched feeling and I am going for kind of a more gothic look or something that looks a little timeless, a little bit moody. Also, I sometimes use it for mechanical surfaces. But on a character like Batman, I definitely want to go with that moody vibe. And with a quill, I tend to find that the line work, you can get a much thinner line than you ever could with a pen. But you have the freedom, depending on how you press it, to go to a much thicker line without having to change pens. And the only downside to using a quill is that you periodically have to keep dipping it back into ink. Now, an artist like me who loves to do a ton of line work and hatching and cross hatching to express textures and inform shapes, I'm finding the quill to be ideal. Uh, yes, I will concede it's not as fast as the pen, but you can get a lot more intricate work, and sometimes it's much more satisfying just to use the quill and also to look at the final result. I'm tending to find that I can go with a pretty long streak and have the line be fairly consistent. I suggest loosening up your hand a bit before you start. And with the different levels of hatching and cross hatching, layering layer upon layer of lines appropriate to the shadow. And while it is fun to get that detail in there, it is important to remember that you are always telling a story, no matter what you do. And a big part of that is keeping the line weights appropriate to not only where the light is coming from in the scene, but also to the objects or parts of the body in the foreground. Like, for example, Batman's arm here is in front of his chest, and so I'm going to want a thicker line around that as opposed to, say, some of the musculature or detailing in the torso or things like that. That can fade into the background, and that's why I like using a quill for those thinner lines. Now, later on in this drawing, I am actually going to use some micron pens to help fade a little bit the darker areas, because a quill is not really ideal for inking a large space. Now, I happen to overload my quill, which can happen sometimes, with too much ink, and it left this big glob on the leg, and I was able to work with it and incorporate that and make it a shadow anyway, so it was kind of fortunate it had to happen there of all places. Like, if it was on Batman's chest or his face, that would have been a big problem. Now, on a character like Batman, it is really important to remember what texture you're trying to render, and also what era of Batman. Like, the trend nowadays I'm noticing is for a more armor plated Batman, and it makes sense, it's a lot more practical. Also, to give a little plug to Bryn Clayton Jones and High Mountain Studios, his Batman short film that he's also working on is coming along awesome, and he has a great armor plated suit. Anyway, he's not paying me to say this, although any donations would be appreciated. Okay, bad jokes aside. So, the era of Batman that I chose to draw is more classic. You know, he's wearing a more form fitting suit, most likely a cloth like material. I'm not an expert in costuming, and the pouches are going to be rendered differently than the rest of the body. And just what I would recommend doing if you're trying to learn textures is to take out a piece of tracing paper and go over photographs. Don't copy other artists' art as and try to pass it off as your own. But if you're studying, uh, take out some tracing paper and go over different textures, different materials, and just try to define it by the shadows alone or the predominant lines, so you can see, oh, cloth is much different than than wool, different than Kevlar, etc. Now going in here with the clouds, I tend to find using the micron really fast. You won't get a thicker coverage, and that's kind of what I wanted, this wispy effect, because sometimes if you don't get a thick line, that's because the ink in your pen is not getting down there onto the page fast enough, so that's why the covering appears spotty. So you can go slower and get a thicker line, but if you don't want that, like I did with the clouds, just go ahead and do that. And I would be remiss if I did not mention Carly Ide. She is an inking instructor of mine that I had when I was studying at the Joe Kubert School. I took a online course from her, and she's the one who introduced me to using the quill and taught me a lot of really great inking techniques. So check out her work on Instagram. I believe she has a YouTube channel as well. But here's my Batman. Well, inking with a quill is always a lot of fun, and I hope you give it a shot. Future installment, I will be using digital colors on this piece, so look out for that. And this weekend, I will be doing the episode of the Spider-Man 4 Kurt Connors transforming into the lizard, with hopefully a short interview with actor Bill Reed Jr. So, in the meantime, keep telling your stories.